And the guy, to his credit, he said, no, I've got the right to film this. So someone gets out of this unmarked police car, and Naughty gets out the passenger side, right? He's the only person in civvy clothes. Here he is here. He's got out the passenger side of an unmarked car. So in other words, he's been chauffeured, right, to this scene for some reason, presumably by someone. Look at his hairline. So is this the man? Is this the impersonator? And have they brought him to the arrest scene in order to possibly switch him? Now, I showed this at Liverpool, and there was a guy who knows all about armed response policies and stuff, and he said, well, they're not behaving how they should. He reckoned that the two unarmed officers should have been moved away from the perpetrator, and the armed officers should have taken control. I don't know if that's true. But it's possible that these officers just think that they're taking part in an exercise, I would suggest, and that they've been told that they've then been told to sign official secrets or whatever. You know, it's not the case necessarily that they all know what's going on. Now, since this lecture, I have been contacted by a police authorised firearms officer who served in firearms for 13 years. This is an extract from what he said. The clip involving the arrest of Thomas Mair had me quite astonished, as it did not follow any firearms training that I am or have ever been aware of. In fact, it was like a training example of what not to do in that situation. The video clip clearly indicates that the suspect prior to arrest was potentially armed, and to make things more complicated, he did not have a firearm in plain sight. The weapon at the point of arrest had clearly not been identified or located. In addition to this, one must not, as an authorised firearms officer, assume a suspect has only one weapon on their person and deal with the suspect as a serious armed threat until thoroughly searched. The search should be carried out by armed officers only while the suspect is at gunpoint with at least one other armed officer. No unarmed officer should be anywhere near this situation, with their only role being to create a sterile area for armed officers to work within, keeping members of the public away from the scene. So who is that guy in the video, and why has he been chauffeured to the arrest location? Now, another fact which sheds light on the perpetrator being a patsy is that the police knew his name. They called out his name. When they got out of the car, they shouted the name of Tommy Mair, and this has been redacted from the trial, right? How do I know this? Because I've interviewed the couple who saw him being arrested. So this is me talking to the couple who witnessed the arrest. When you first saw him and the police weren't there, how fast was he walking? Did he look? Where did you think he was headed?
I wasn't sure because it's a cul-de-sac, but he was just walking just a normal pace. He wasn't running or anything like that.
They got out of the car, they said his name first, so they obviously knew his name, and they just charged at him and took him straight down onto the floor, and that's where he went back and banged his head. Yeah, after they charged him and took him down, they said to him, "Have you just shot and stabbed somebody in Birstall?" Didn't reach for no weapons, just stood there with his bag in his hand, like, didn't even try run off or nothing, just stood and faced him like that.
Now, I didn't understand the importance of them knowing his name until I got back, so I've rang the guy again just to get him to confirm that. So he's on the phone here. If you just tell me what you heard them say.
He says, "Are you Tommy Mair? Have you just shot and stabbed somebody in Birstall?" And I couldn't hear what he was saying.
And you couldn't hear what Tom Mair replied. Okay, so
what police were saying, yeah, but I couldn't hear the word he was saying.
Right. So you're fairly sure that he said his name?
They definitely knew his name. Honestly, they did.
Right.
100% they said his name.
Right.
I said to police as well, they know his name already when I come in. They did. 100% they said his name, and they did.
So can you believe that the defence team haven't got those two as witnesses? Right? They didn't even mount a defence. So the police called out his name. Now, based on their statements and the police's statements, this is what I think happened. So they're following him for some period, I don't know how long for. He gets a bit spooked, so he comes off the main road and starts walking into a cul-de-sac. I don't think he knows it's a cul-de-sac. So the car pulls up and the police get out and they shout, "Are you Tommy Mair?" He turns around and he says something like, "That's me." They then say, "Have you got any weapons? Put your bags down and show your hands." They then charge towards him and rugby tackle him to the ground. And once they've got him down, they say, "Have you just shot and stabbed someone in Birstall?" That's what I think happened. Now, these two police officers were interviewed on Good Morning Britain, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And I'm going to show you a clip from this because it's very revealing.
We were about a few miles away with Craig.
Weren't we, Craig? Why does he need the authority of Craig?
And yeah, we was on the radio, and we decided we were sent into the area to have a look for the suspect, and we got told to proceed with caution because he was obviously armed still and he possibly had a gun and a knife on him.
So then you saw Thomas Mayer,
Yes.
didn't
You
you?
didn't know at the time, though.
We didn't know.
Did you see that? So the journalist on the left's been briefed. He's been briefed that they do not know the perpetrator's name because he jumps in to save that question. Watch again.
So then you saw Thomas Mayer,
Yes.
didn't
You
you?
didn't know at the
Yeah,
time, though.
we didn't know. We thought it was him.
Right. Did you see the fade to white there? Right. They've actually cut 6 seconds out of this interview before they've posted it online. I know they've cut 6 seconds out because of the helpful little clock on breakfast telly. So here we go.
So then you saw Thomas Mayer,
Yes.
didn't
You
you?
didn't know at the
Yeah,
time, though.
we didn't know. We thought it was him.
Is the man who had just murdered Jo Cox.
Yeah.
So they're talking about the suspect and the identity of the suspect. 6 seconds gone. I'd be interested to see the original interview for this.
What did you know about him at that stage?
Absolutely nothing other than he had a firearm potentially on him and a knife on him.
So you've turned the car around. Do you park the car? Do you stop the car in the street? Do you jump out?
No, we started following him.
Now, it's interesting that they're following him, that they didn't just apprehend him immediately. We don't know how long for, and we don't know where from either.
He started walking down the cul-de-sac, and there were a couple of people in the gardens, because it was around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Now, that suggests to me that the couple of people in the gardens is a problem to him. Otherwise, why mention it? And what he says next, I think, reveals what the problem is.
I put the window down and I sort of sat on the window ledge and I hung out the window. Craig held my belt.
All right, so what's going on there? He's sitting on the window ledge of a car, hanging out the window, with the other one holding his belt. What I think's going on there is he's got a taser in his hand, and he's thinking about tasering him because you do need to get within about 10 or 15 feet. Not easy to taser someone from a moving car. That would explain what he's just said there, right? And I think that might also explain why he's worried about people being in the gardens, because he doesn't want to do it in front of children, right? So, but he's not saying that in the interview. He's just saying that he's hanging out the window with Craig holding me belt. Isn't it funny?
And I remember Craig shouting to me, he's got something in his hand, he's got something in his hand.
He had a black hold-all and Tesco carrier bag in his hand.
And I was shouting to him to stop. He just ignored me at the start, and then he turned around, and then Craig, he was still shouting, and then I just told him to put his bag down, show his hands, and he did. He threw his bag down.
He threw his bag down, didn't he then, yeah?
And he put his arms out to the side and went, "It's me."
He's missed a bit out, hasn't he? He's missed the bit out where he says, "Are you Tommy Mayer?" That's me. He's not saying, "It's me," admitting to the crime. He's replying to the question, "Are you Tommy Mayer?" These two guys, in my opinion, are perjurers for leaving this out of their court interview, that they were given his name beforehand.
I can't remember getting out the car. The next memory I've got is we're literally shoulder to shoulder with Craig, and we're running as fast as we could towards him, and then as we've come probably as far as we were to you, he's quickly moved his arms from outside, from his outstretched towards his belt and down, and
Which is the worry where the firearm is.
we thought
Yeah.
we were.
We thought. He's not confirming it. He's saying we thought it was there.
Yeah, that's what we thought.
What did you do?
We rugby tackled him to the ground and got hold of his hands as quick as we could. And then you put some handcuffs on
Yeah.
him.
So, in my opinion, they've just rugby tackled an unarmed 53-year-old to the ground and smashed his head open and then been given a bravery award for it. So how might it have been done? So based on my investigation, where I am at this point in time, this is what I think happened. It might change if new evidence comes along. So they've selected their patsy Thomas Mayer weeks or even months before, and they've observed his behaviour patterns. They've predicted where he's going to be on a specific day or time and observe him on that day. They ensure that Jo Cox, the target, is brought near to that point at a particular time. A military hitman dressed as a patsy executes the murder. So someone with a similar stature, with a goatee beard and a cap. I'm not saying that the person who killed Jo Cox was the person being interviewed. Then the perpetrator flees the scene and receives information as to where the patsy is and just starts heading towards him, dressed in the same clothes, so that any CCTV or eyewitness evidence in between will match. When the perpetrator is near the patsy, the pasty is arrested and jailed. And then an impersonator takes part in the interview and trial. And we might ask, well, where's it gone wrong? Why did he wait for 16 minutes, if indeed he did, at that in John Nelson Close? Well, maybe he went in this house, which was a safe house, and he was waiting for a black baseball cap to be dropped off. Because I think it's possible that the real Thomas Mayer, when he went home, because he did go home, he changed his cap from a black one to a white one. So their operative had the wrong cap on. So maybe he had to wait until they got a cap to that house. Or it could be that they've lost observation on the real Thomas Mayer, or he's gone somewhere that's difficult, and he's been told to lie low for 20 minutes before he can continue on in their operation. So ensure that the target, Jo Cox, is brought to a particular point, i.e. the library, at a particular time. Now the person who brought Jo Cox to the library was Fazila Aswat. So was she involved, even unwittingly perhaps? Now she does seem very concerned with timing if you watch the BBC documentary. Just listen to what she says.
She was supposed to hit back into the office for 12 o'clock. But I knew Jo would never come at that time. She was always late. And obviously we had the surgery booked for 1 o'clock. So we ideally wanted to get to Bursell for about 9:45 to. She came into the office at 12, I think about 35. Said, we don't have time for you to get a sandwich, but I've got a pasta bake for you in the fridge. Heat it up in the microwave and you can have it on the way.
You're not having a fucking sandwich, you're having a pasta bake. How long does it take to eat a sandwich? So she's very concerned. Is it just to get her there to the surgery for those really important constituents? or is there another reason? Now, in Brendan Cox's book, he talks about changes in security measures which happened just before the murder. Just listen to this. So he's talking about when Jo is dying in the road and Fazila is holding Jo in her arms as she's dying. Then suddenly Fazila remembered that she and Jo had met the Chief Inspector of the West Yorkshire Police 3 weeks before. He had given both Fazila and Jo his number and said, if you have any security issues, ring me straight away. She can't remember how she managed it, but still holding Jo, Fazila rang the Chief Inspector. Now think about that. You've got a dying woman in your arms. Are you going to get your phone out and get the contacts out for this Chief Inspector, or are you going to ring 999 and get an ambulance? He might be on the golf course, right? And who is he? Is he part of the operation? And was he phoned in order to inform him that it had happened? So there's a lot of other details that need to be exposed in relation to this case. I mentioned the CCTV evidence. It's actually not that important because it doesn't identify Mayer. Nick Wallen, who was the detective in charge of the investigation, you Google his name, you'll find people saying that he's a corrupt officer. Brendan Cox, hope not hate. Nick Collerstrom will tell us about that. Mayer's legal team, etc., etc. So it's there waiting to be exposed, this case. So the motive for the Jo Cox murder, I don't think it's linked to Brexit. I know a lot of people do, and people have said, oh, he shouted out, what was it, Britain first. Well, he may or may not have. If he was an operative, right, whatever he's shouting out, you've got to consider that that's just putting a false motive in people's minds. So to me, it's irrelevant what he shouted out, right? If you look at Jo Cox's past and her connections, I think the motive lies there. It's interesting that the Clement Freud revelations came out the day before this murder, and Matthew Freud was involved in organising the Brendan Cox speech that he did in Trafalgar Square. So there may be a link to that. She's linked to Gordon Brown, Gordon Brown and Clement Freud were both involved with Madeleine McCann, were they not? Right? So we need to think a bit broader than just Brexit with this, right? I'm not even convinced that it did affect the Brexit outcome. Well, not outcome, but the swingometer. We've only got the companies who do those polls to rely on for that. It wouldn't change my vote. I mean, would it change? Would this change your Brexit vote? Anyone in this room? Wouldn't change mine. So I think that's a false motive. Now, some people who are not aware of how state assassinations are run might be a bit puzzled. Firstly, when I say state, I don't mean Prime Minister or the Conservative Party. Political parties or even the Cabinet do not run all sections of the state. In particular, security services have zero day-to-day oversight by Parliament. They are a law unto themselves. If a security agency of the UK, such as MI5, deemed that Jo Cox was a threat to national security, probably because of something she knew, then it is possible that a state assassination was ordered without anyone in Parliament even knowing about it. Once the order has been approved and the wheels are set in motion to eliminate their target, careful consideration would be undertaken to determine what method is best for the hit. I hear some people saying, why wouldn't they just arrange something more simple, like an accident or a poisoning? All methods have their own problems and risks. In a supposedly democratic state like ours, it would be essential for the state to ensure that it is done without any suspicion of state involvement. Methods such as poisoning or even an accident of an MP is going to make people ask whether the state was involved. And any method that does not allow the case to be immediately solved, albeit fraudulently, means that a lengthy investigation has to be opened and will remain open until it is solved, which can create a headache, especially if everyone in the investigation is not part of the initial plot. In order to deflect blame away from the state, a false motive is useful and can be constructed such that it points to an individual rather than the state. If you choose a method where the perpetrator is clearly identified and there is a clear motive, albeit both being bogus, the case can be shut down and quickly forgotten about. If Cox had been assassinated in a more clandestine James Bond style way without an obvious perpetrator being accused, then we'd have a nation of concerned public demanding the killer be found. By doing it the way they have enables them to quickly close down their bogus investigation and the case can be quickly put to bed. Now, if my hypothesis is correct, it means that Tommy Mayer's legal team would have been in league with the agency that ordered the assassination, along with the judge. Don't tell me you don't realise that we have corrupt lawyers and judges in this country. Remember that his legal team did not mount any defence, and I suspect his legal team knew fine well that their client was not the real Tommy Mayer. Bear in mind also that once approval is given by, let's say, MI5 for this assassination on grounds of national security, in their eyes it then becomes perfectly legal to kill her and frame someone else for the murder. I suspect that at least 2 senior police officers were fully aware of the scope of this plot, but have carried it out in such a way that as few officers as possible beneath them know how it was done. It is likely, in my opinion, that the senior investigating officer was working for the team running the assassination. I just want to expand on the debate about a possible motive. If some group wanted Jo Cox killed, it would be most likely because of information that she knew about. If you are going to manufacture a motive, then you need to create one that people will believe. She was very pro-immigration and supported people from other countries who wanted to settle in the UK. So the most obvious enemy to her would be a far-right extremist who was against immigration. This is the narrative the mainstream media sold us, which was a completely false narrative and a completely false motive. Consider the fact that the perpetrator is alleged to have shouted out "Britain first" before pulling the trigger. There is some controversy over whether this was shouted out, but I would like to point out 2 things here. First, if it was shouted out, it was not shouted out by Tommy Mair, but by an operative, whose role was to dispatch of Jo Cox. Therefore, whatever was shouted out would have been done to plant a false motive in the public mindset. It would have been done to get people to buy into the false premise that this murder was about an argument over immigration. Second, the fact that there is controversy over whether he said it, I suspect, is no accident, because it means that people will discuss it more, and the false motive is then reinforced by the fact there is controversy over whether it was shouted or not. This argument is totally irrelevant in trying to establish the real motive. I strongly suspect that the motive was to do with what Jo Cox knew, which the state could not risk being publicly known about. Did she know something about Gordon Brown or Clement Freud? It is alleged that Tommy Mair was getting far-right literature that somebody had been subscribing him to, then it being sent to his house. He sent the material back unopened. It is likely this was done in order to manufacture evidence to suggest he was interested in far-right ideology. This was happening some time before the murder, so I suspect the assassination was planned perhaps some weeks before it happened. Finally, what I'd like you to consider is, if I am correct, what it must have been like for the real Tommy Mair. A 53-year-old man who likes gardening and caring for cats is walking down a street minding his own business. He has no knowledge of what has just happened outside the library 40 minutes earlier. A police car starts following him and he is not sure why, so he diverts his route off the main road and walks down a random street. The two officers get out of their car and shout at him, and then pull him to the ground, splitting his head open. They then arrest him on suspicion of murder, and he is put in a police cell. He is not given legal advice, and 6 months later, after not being given a trial, he is sent to Franklin Prison as a Category A prisoner for life. Please do me a favour and ensure your MP watches this video.
Order. Colleagues, today the two extremely brave police officers who apprehended the killer of our late friend and colleague Jo Cox are in the side gallery for Prime Minister's questions. I am referring to PC Jonathan Wright and PC Craig Nichols, both of the West Yorkshire Police. Gentlemen, we honour your public service, we thank you for it, and we offer you the warmest of welcomes here to the House of Commons today.